Hi, I'm Ben Guilford, I'm the owner of the Fire Brick Company, and in this video we're going to show you how to paint the PreCast Flue Gallery of your brick oven kit.
So there are a huge amount of different things that you could do with your oven once it's built. You don't necessarily have to leave it exposed as we've done here, and as a lot of people tend to do in Australia. You could actually build it into a full enclosure if you wanted to. No problem at all. And in fact, in North America and places that have particularly cold winters, that's something that we do recommend, is actually building the oven in so that it's completely enclosed and it's not going to get any rain or snow falling on it, which could then get into the oven, and then when you get a big freeze thaw happen, you get heaving and major cracking. And so that's why you actually see in North America, you see a lot of ovens are actually built into almost a little house. All right, so what I'm getting at is there's an awful lot of things that you can do with the oven now to make it your own, make it sort of unique and really fit into the area that you've got in mind for your home. So I'm going to take you through a few of those options. We'll just talk you through a few of them, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to be doing here. So one option which doesn't get done a whole lot is building the oven behind a wall. So if you're going to build an oven behind a wall, well, it's a question we get from time to time. Is it okay if I put the oven behind a wall? Is that going to affect the depth of the throat, in a negative way? And the answer is absolutely, you can do that, and it's not going to cause any problems for you in terms of accessing the oven. I would, however, recommend just a single thickness of brick in front of the vent here, so that you don't have, if you have a full brick depth here, that's significantly increasing the depth of the throat, and so that's not really ideal because it starts to sort of constrict your movement with the oven tools. Okay, so by all means, build it behind a wall, but ideally just a single thickness of brick, about 4 inches, 5 inches. If you're not going to build your oven behind a wall, then you're going to be seeing this surface, and so we want to give you some ideas of things that you can do. Firstly, you could just leave your flue gallery just the way it is. So it's got this lovely light grey colour. This is how it actually comes to you. You'll get it in this light grey finish, and you can leave it that way. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, and it's sort of got, I guess, maybe a kind of a rustic feel to it when you leave it in the grey, and that fits in really well in some people's homes. The other option you have is to paint it. And we're fairly specific about the paint that we recommend. It's called PPG TempTech 328. We've actually tested 7 different high temperature paints. We made samples, we cured them, we painted them, and then we took them up to about 230 degrees to see how each one would perform, because the flue gallery actually gets fairly hot. You can see that it's not insulated. And so we've got all the hot gases, smoke and flames roaring up the chimney. This can actually get to a bit over 200 degrees on the outside. And so we want to make sure that if we do coat it, we coat it in something that's going to handle that. So we tested these 7 different paints, and we found that most of them would blister quite significantly and get some flaking, even though they were classed as a high temperature paint, because of the substrate that they were being applied to, this refractory castable. They weren't handling that very well. However, the PPG TempTech handled it extremely well. It was the best out of the bunch. So that is the paint that we recommend. Again, if you're in the US, you'll have a can of this in your kit. If you're in Australia, it's one of the options for you if you'd like it. So personally, I actually really like to paint the flue gallery in this satin black high temperature paint, because I think it makes it look really sharp, and it really makes the brickwork sort of pop out. It makes it, sort of sets it off a little bit. So I'm going to be showing you today how to apply this high temperature paint to the flue gallery, and just taking you through that process, as well as taking you through the process of applying acrylic render to the dome of the oven. The first thing that I want to say is you have to wait until you've done all of your curing fires to fully dry out the flue gallery and the dome before we even think about applying the paint or the acrylic render. In fact, we really actually recommend that you do the full schedule of curing fires and then you do at least 4 major firings. I mean, full fire and forget methods where you actually heat the whole oven up to 400 degrees plus and really get the thing really good and hot to make sure you've driven out every little bit of moisture that's in the oven before you put this paint on, because the enemy of paint is moisture in the substrate. If this has got a bit of moisture still in it when we apply it, then we may find when we fire it up next time, that moisture tries to come through the paint as steam and cause blisters. So we don't really want that. So really make sure that it's really good and dry. And that also means ensuring that if it's rained in the last couple of days, well, you need to do another firing to dry it all out before you do the coatings. Okay, so really think, I want it to be dry. I want it to be bone dry so that when I put this on, it's going to stay on. So just be careful about that. Remember, you're building something that's going to last a very long time. I know you're probably like really keen to get it done, but this is one of those things where it's really good to wait until you have good weather and you're not sort of risking damaging the coating by it getting rained on, particularly after you've applied it. You want to make sure for this paint, I want to see at least 24 hours of good weather before it gets any rain on it. Okay, and for the roll-on render, we want at least 48 hours of good weather, that's no rain, for that 48 hours in order to allow the roll-on render to set properly so that it can handle getting rained on. All right, so it is a nice straightforward process. Back in the day, we actually used to make little tins of this that you would brush on with a brush, and frankly, that was difficult at best. It was quite hard to apply, and so what we've actually got now is these spray cans, so we get these custom made just for us. What you will need to do is mask off all of your brickwork with masking tape and some paper to stop the overspray getting on anything that you don't want it on. And then we're going to do several light coats over this surface, just nice even light coats to build up the thickness that we're after. One other thing that I'd like to mention that I've done here is I have actually gone and gotten some of the refractory mortar, the same stuff that we use to land the flue gallery and do all the brick joints for the dome. I've taken some of that and I've actually just worked it into the little bug holes that were in the front of the PreCast Flue Gallery. You don't have to do that. To be honest, I don't really mind the bug holes. I think they just add a little bit of character. But I thought I'd show you what it looks like if you do that, because you might be wondering how it's going to turn out. And so you can see I've filled these in. They're still going to be visible. Once I paint this, you'll still notice them because there's just a slight difference in texture between the casting and the hole that I've filled in. So we'll still see that, but it's not the end of the world. Just putting a bit of effort into trying to make sure that the masking tape goes into these mortar joints, just so that I don't get the paint running down into those joints and staining the mortar. If it does, it's not the end of the world. We can actually come along and scrub that with a scourer, but if we do it right now, then we don't have to later. If you can remove your flue before you paint the PreCast Flue Gallery, then by all means do that, because it's one less thing that you could get paint on. If you are able to do that, then you'll also be able to remove the ring that covers the expansion joint around the flue. So we can take that off, put that somewhere safe. And now all I have to do is just mask this off with some paper before I paint. Doesn't matter if we get some paint on the ceramic fiber rope, that's not an issue at all. Okay, so I just want to address a question that I know some of you are having right now, and that is, well, wait, why don't I just paint this before we install it? I can just put it down on the ground, I don't have to mask anything off, I can just paint to my heart's content. And look, you actually can get away with doing that if you want, particularly if you've made sure the flue gallery is nice and dry and clean before you do that. However, when you install the flue gallery, the chances are you're going to get mortar all over it as a result of the installation. You're going to get perlite, render coming in behind it, and that's going to get on the back of it. And then in the end, you're probably going to want to touch it up. So do some touch-up painting after you've installed it. But in order to do that properly, you probably need to then mask it all off, in which case you might as well have just left it and just do it now. And so that's the approach that we take. So technically, yes, you can pre-paint this if you really wanted to, but I don't actually think it saves you any time at all. So personally, I recommend just doing it in this order. And then you're also making sure that this thing is bone dry because it gets a chance to be fired prior to being painted. A couple of other things. In terms of applying the paint, there are limitations on the temperature that you can do that in. So we don't recommend applying it at any temperature below 10 degrees Celsius or above 35 degrees Celsius because it can affect the paint. Particularly if it's cold, you'll find that this won't spray particularly well at all. So the other thing that I will mention is if you really want to, you could mask off the mortar, so you're just painting the flue gallery. Personally, I like to paint the mortar and the flue gallery together because then if there are any little inconsistencies in my mortar joint here, which guess what, there are, then you're not actually going to see them because it'll all just be one big black section. It sort of hides any little imperfections. So yeah, that's again personal choice, but if you wanted to, you could try and mask off the mortar. However, it is quite difficult to get masking tape to stick to it because it's sort of a coarse surface. All right, so we're going to do at least 2 coats of this Temtex. So remember, you don't want to do it really thick. We're going light coats. You're going to hold the can about 20 centimeters away from the surface. If you go in too close, you're going to get runs, so drips in the paint. That's going to happen instantly. So you want to be working a good 20 centimeters away, and we're just going to go in nice, even sort of movements so that we don't end up overlapping too much in one area and creating a real wet patch. Remember, you can always add more paint later. It's really difficult to take paint off if you put too much on. You just have to let it set. And if you do get a run, that's actually a good point. If you get a run in your paint, and that's really irritating, you're just going to have to let it dry. It usually takes about 12 hours for it to dry hard enough for you to then sand it back. So get some really light sandpaper, give it a light sand, take the run out, and then you can coat over it again. One last point is, and this is quite an important one, make sure it's clean. So I've given this a really good wipe down, and actually something I would recommend that we did earlier was actually just wipe it down with a solvent, so something like methylated spirits or thinners, something to just make sure there's no oils on the surface, because when this is cast, we actually have to oil the molds that it's cast into, and so you may actually find there is some residual oil on the surface. It'd be quite hard to see. So give it a wipe down with a solvent, and then give it maybe half an hour just to make sure all of that gas is off before you put on your paint. Now, I'm not worrying about sort of lines because it will all even out anyway. So don't worry about getting a perfectly uniform surface for the first couple of coats because as we go over it, it will just sort of all fill in. And the beauty of this paint is that it is a satin finish, and so you're very unlikely actually to see much sort of discontinuity in the surface. You'll see very uniform finish because it all tends to sort of flatten out and give you this nice uniform surface. So you want to allow this coat enough time to dry before you coat the next. It actually flashes off fairly quickly, that is, the solvents in the paint evaporate quite quickly. But I usually recommend allowing about half an hour between coats to make sure that the first coat is dry before you put the next coat on. You'll see I've done quite a light coat, and the nature of this paint is that it's a very satin sort of matte finish, so it will just flatten out on you nice and easily. I'm not a particularly great spray painter, but by the time I'm done, so I'll probably do another 2 coats will probably do it, and this will have a lovely uniform black finish. So we've done 3 coats on the Flue Gallery, nice light coats. Again, like I said before, you don't have to worry about getting the surface perfectly uniform with wet paint. You're just not going to be able to do that, and you don't have to, because this paint flattens out as it dries. So you get a really uniform finish even if you're a little bit uneven with the coating, which is great. So I did my 3 coats and I'm really happy with that finish. I'm going to leave it at that. There's actually enough paint in the can to do more like 5 coats, even 6, but it's not strictly necessary. This can, completely empty, but I painted another Flue Gallery as well with the 1 can. So rest assured, there's plenty of paint there to coat this for you. Just make sure you do those nice light coats. Don't try and do 2 like really heavy coats, just nice and light, and you can just keep coming back and doing more until you've got the look you're after. So now the fun part, we get to take this off. There you have it. I think that looks really sharp. I really like the way that we just see the bricks pop out against the black. I think that looks really neat and tidy. Remember, if you did get any little runs into the mortar, you can always just scrape that off with even a paint scraper or a scourer. Just remove that. If you do get any paint sort of run down onto the brick, you can use some thinners or solvent to try and remove that. It can be a little tricky to get off. Just do your best to apply that masking tape well, and then it makes your life a lot easier. So I'm really pleased with how that looks. We've got obviously a lot of overspray onto the dome, but that is why we do the Flue Gallery first, and then we do the roll-on render second, because I can come in and just paint the roll-on render in behind the dome over that overspray.